Today, we are taking on a topic that sits right at this really critical intersection of the sacred and the strictly secular, Masjid governance in the UK. And we're not just talking about admin here. We are exploring the meticulous blend of spiritual principles and practical, often unforgiving legal governance.
It's a hugely important deep dive, really, for anyone involved in community leadership. What we're doing is pulling together the guidance material that's out there to help trustees navigate this dual landscape. You've got the spiritual side, the imperatives of Islamic Sharia, and then the very practical, sometimes very difficult rules of UK charity law. Our mission today is to sort of extract the clearest possible path for responsible, transparent, and this is key, spiritually authentic administration.
That spiritual authenticity, that's the foundation, isn't it? I mean, at its core, Masjid administration is an amana, a sacred trust. The Quran itself, Surah An-Nisa, verse 58, it commands you to render trusts to whom they are due. It sets this divine standard. But the sources, they show that real-world governance is, well, it often falls short, significantly short. And that leads to mistrust, scrutiny.
Precisely. And you can see the impact of those failures. We see specific, quite concerning examples cited. Take the Newbury Park Masjid case. Trustees reportedly overstaying their constitutional term limits, basically locking out any community participation. Or you have the really painful internal issues at Brighton Mosque, where these long, drawn-out disputes just paralyze the management.
These aren't just dry legal arguments, then. They completely stop the institution from working.
Absolutely. When the governance fails, the institution stops serving its purpose. And these cases, they point to bigger systemic issues. Think about the vulnerabilities that come up again and again. A lack of a clear constitution, for a start. Management committees that are often self-appointed or simply unelected. And sadly, you also see issues of, ethnic fragmentation, which just creates these internal divisions. And then there's the big one.
Financial transparency.
Always. That lack of transparency breeds suspicion faster than anything else.
Okay, so we have this deeply spiritual intention, but it needs a modern legal structure to protect it. Let's unpack that. If a masjid is a house of Allah, what is its traditional legal status? And how does that ancient idea, how does it fit into British law?
Well, traditionally, a masjid is set up as a waqf. It's a religious endowment, a permanent one. It's a very distinct legal idea where a property is dedicated forever made inalienable for religious or charitable purposes. The crucial point is that ownership isn't held by any person. It's dedicated to Allah.
So no one can inherit it or sell it or profit from it.
That's stewardship in its purest form. You're holding the asset for its divine purpose. The waqf has three main features: perpetuity, so it's permanent; inalienability, you can't sell it, and a very specific charitable purpose. The governance is handled by a mutawali, a steward or trustee who has a duty of care, but, and this is critical, no ownership rights.
And that system of stewardship then has to be mapped onto UK law. And this is a vital point for anyone listening who's in a leadership role. When does a mosque legally have to formalize its governance?
That's the starting line. Any masjid in England or Wales with an annual income over £5,000 is legally required to register as a charity. And that registration is the trigger. It means you need a compliant legal structure, and there are a few options.
Okay, let's look at the three big ones then, focusing on how they sort of align with that waqf idea.
Right, so the traditional starting point is the charitable trust. Conceptually, it's the closest thing to a waqf. You have trustees holding property for a specific charitable purpose. It's simple to set up. But, and this is the huge legal risk, the trustees bear personal liability. And the trust itself isn't a separate legal entity.
Let's just pause there because that's a massive red flag. If a masjid is running a multi-million-pound building, what does personal liability actually mean for a trustee?
It means that if the masjid gets sued, say, for a serious injury on the premises, or it defaults on a big contract, and the trust assets can't cover the debt, well, those trustees could be pursued personally, their own homes, their savings, they're potentially on the line, which is why the modern solution became so vital.
And that leads us to the Charitable Incorporated Organization, the CIO, which came in around 2013.
Exactly. The CIO was created to solve that liability problem. It offers incorporation, it has its own legal personality. This means the organization itself can own property, sign contracts, and be sued in its own name. And most importantly, it gives the trustees limited liability protection. That massively reduces the personal financial risk, as long as they act properly, of course. Plus, it's regulated just by the Charity Commission, which is simpler than the third option.
Which is the limited company by guarantee registered as a charity. Bit more complex.
Yes, much more, often for very large organizations. It means dealing with dual regulation from both companies' house and the Charity Commission. So when you pull all the guidance together, the comparison is pretty clear. While the charitable trust feels the most Sharia compliant in theory, the foundation CIO is often seen as the most effective modern compromise. It gives you that traditional appointed leadership model where trustees are the only members, but with that crucial protection of limited liability.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, because governance also has to be about participation. The sources all stress the principle of shura, consultation. How do you integrate that divine command into a secular legal structure?
Well, the theological basis for Shura is the moral compass. It's crystal clear in the Quran. You've got Surah Al-Imran commanding consultation, Surah Al-Shura praising those who conduct their affairs through mutual consultation. It's meant to ensure collective decisions, to prevent one person or a small group from having total control.
But how that shura actually works in practice, it depends entirely on which CIO model you pick, right?
Absolutely. If a community goes for the foundation CIO, the power is entirely with the Board of Trustees. They run the show, they make all the key decisions. Legally, they don't have to ask the congregation for their opinion. That model really relies on the, quote, honesty, integrity, and judgment of the trustees.
Okay, so what about the association CIO? That sounds like it's a more formal way of doing shura.
It's far more democratic, yes. The association model lets the congregation, the members, take part directly in decision-making. And crucially, they get to elect the trustees. So the trustees are formally accountable to the community they serve. They can be voted out.
That formalizes the accountability, which seems essential. But isn't there a risk there? The sources seem to hint that association CIOs can sometimes get bogged down in, politicking and power struggles.
That is the trade-off, you're right. The foundation model is faster, it's simpler, and it can avoid some of those disputes that can paralyze an organization when you have contested elections every few years. So while the association model aligns better with the spirit of Shura, the foundation model often gives you a stability that's highly valued, but the warning is always there. In a foundation model, if trustees are, let's say, hungry for power, that lack of checks and balances can lead to authoritarian management.
Yep.
Which betrays the whole principle.
So finding that balance is maybe the biggest structural challenge. But we do see good examples of the association model working.
Oh, yes. The Manchester Central Mosque is a good case study. They run an association CIO with a Majlis-e-Shura. It's a consultative body of about 45 diverse members who guide the 9 trustees. So it formally bakes in that wide community input, but keeps the legal governance board small and effective.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's drill down now onto the individual trustee. What does it take to be a good one? We've got this dual compliance again, the legal hurdles versus the spiritual ones. How do they interact?
Okay, so you have to start with the UK legal requirements from the Charities Act 2011. They're strict, and the disqualifications are often automatic. Unspent convictions for things like dishonesty, terrorism, or money laundering, you're out. Same for financial insolvency. If you're bankrupt or in a debt relief order, you cannot serve.
And if you've been removed from a trusteeship before by the Charity Commission,
that's another automatic ban. And the legal duties are serious. You have to act with reasonable care and skill. You have to ensure the charity's purpose is met, declare all conflicts of interest. And we should repeat, even with a CIO, trustees can still be held personally liable for negligence, for fraud, or for intentionally breaching their duties.
So the legal side is the floor. It's the minimum standard. What about the Sharia principles that have to be laid on top of that?
Sharia sets a much higher ethical ceiling. The sources are clear. A trustee must be a practicing Muslim who follows Sharia law and shows high moral character. The key criteria are adl, so justice and good character, and amana, trustworthiness. Practically, this means avoiding major sins or practices that clash with Islamic ethics, like being directly involved in riba or interest-based finance.
That's a crucial point. The integrity required goes beyond just secular law into personal religious practice.
Absolutely. And a practical piece of advice offered is that mosques should add a specific clause to their CIO constitution to formalize this. A clause that makes it a requirement for trustees to meet these spiritual criteria, making sure the legal document and the divine mandate are aligned. And governance isn't just about who's on the board, it's about having written policies that turn that spiritual vision into a reality. This is where the niyya, the intention, has to become specific, measurable objectives.
So what are the main policy areas trustees need to get right to make that happen?
First, they have to formally write down the mosque's vision and mission, confirming it's both a spiritual haven and a community resource. Then you have staffing. Clear recruitment rules for imams, demanding proper qualifications, DBS checks, and an accepted school of thought.
Facilities management must be another huge one.
It is. You need policies covering accessibility for everyone, security and environmental stewardship. It's about reflecting that we are stewards of the earth.
And what about the really high-risk policies, the ones you absolutely cannot get wrong, like safeguarding?
Child protection has to be paramount. Your policies must state, unequivocally, that the welfare of the child comes first, especially in a madrasa. That means mandatory training, clear reporting procedures, proper supervision, no excuses. Then there's anti-terrorism compliance. Trustees have to adhere to the legislation, which covers congregational safety, dealing with disruptive behavior, and DBS checks for all relevant staff. This is completely non-negotiable.
And financial integrity. You mentioned that was a huge vulnerability right at the start. How do the sources say trustees should handle that?
They need really stringent internal controls. It doesn't matter how small the income is. Simple, effective rules are best. 2 people to count collections always. 2 signatures on any major check. And critically, all funds and investments have to be strictly Sharia compliant. No riba.
It sounds like compliance prevents disaster, but it doesn't automatically create that community trust.
Yeah.
If you build the structure, how do you measure success?
That's it. That's translating the spiritual into the measurables. You need mechanisms for monitoring, evaluation, and quality assurance. This focus on operational excellence, on quality. It's the Islamic concept of ihsan. If niyyah is the intention, ihsan is the measurable standard of excellence. It gives the community proof that their trust is well placed. The ultimate success of a UK masjid really depends on implementing this integrated approach. The 2 obligations, Sharia and UK law, they shouldn't conflict. When you do it right, they actually reinforce each other to create governance excellence.
It's a powerful thought, really, that this journey towards better modern governance is actually a return to first principles. The foundational Islamic principles of consultation, transparency, and accountability that we saw with the Prophet Muhammad's first masjid in Medina, that was a center for everything: worship, consultation, justice.
It's all about building trust. And maybe here's the final provocative thought for you to take away. We've established that refusing to have a clear constitution goes against Islamic principles of trust and justice. So if you're part of a community institution, ask yourself this. Is the perceived complexity of governance just masking a deeper reluctance to give up control? And are we truly, honestly fulfilling our divine mandate of amana,